we're at the hour now, so we're going to get started. So thank you for coming in. Those who are, mute everyone else. Those who are in, can you say hi and just let me know where you're calling from? Who have just arrived. So I can see Martin's here. We've said hi to Owen and Jackie and Rebecca. And I know some others have arrived and then not quite sure why I can't see them, where they're disappeared to.
Hi, Lorna, it's Natasha. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, my darling. I'm very well.
Very relaxed. I like what's going on behind you.
Oh, a little bit of sparkle, you know, a little bit of glam. Got my frankincense burning. It's all about the love, baby. You know that. You know me.
You're looking lovely. Absolutely.
Oh, bless you.
Thank you for coming in. So
thank you for inviting me.
And as I said, big thank you to everyone for coming today. So this is the second week of our Tuesday Tonic, and I set it up really because I thought it was something useful to do whilst we're, certainly for the most part, most of us are in lockdown or going through the pretty unprecedented times. And it struck me as an opportunity really to do some reflecting and thinking about what's going on, and a space to share and talk about, share ideas, share experiences, and just hopefully have a little bit of fun, hopefully a bit of laughter. And each week what I'm going to try and do is ask somebody to kind of take the lead in sharing where they're coming from and what's going on for them. And last week Rebecca kindly said she would be happy to step up and do that for us. So Rebecca Kinsella is here tonight, or today I should say, this afternoon, and she's going to say a little bit about herself. And after Rebecca's spoken, I'm then going to just play a little, about a minute or so, video. I interviewed Richard Carr, who's a chief executive of Central Bedfordshire, yesterday. We had an hour-long talk. He couldn't, unfortunately, make it today, but he's given some really great ideas for discussions, one of which I've kind of truncated into a 1 minute or 1.5 minute video, and I'm going to share that after Rebecca has said hi. So listen out for that in a little while. So Rebecca, do you want to say hi and tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do and where you're coming in from?
Sure. So my name is Rebecca Kinsella Lamont, and I'm from Boise, Idaho. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. So I'm from Boise, Idaho. I work for IBM. I work for IBM at AECOM. I'm in the IT department. I do a lot of reporting and technical stuff on the computer, problem solving, a lot of analytical. And here in Boise, Idaho, of course, with the coronavirus, there's been a lot of changes and a lot of interesting things going on, rallies and people not wanting to be at home and other people being scared to leave their home, and the economy. And so with this call, I just thought, wow, I would love to listen. So I was able to get on last week, and the conversation was just fabulous. And I like to hear, innovative ideas and how people are collaborating and how it's going to change everything. And so
Brilliant.
That's what I look forward to on this call. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. This part of today's conversation is we're starting to talk about now exiting. Let me just see who's in the waiting room. Right. We're starting to talk about exiting now and returning or going back to some kind of normalcy, if that is such a thing, or normal. And what is starting to approach, and for me, and certainly in the conversation with Richard yesterday, is this notion that not everything has been bad. And I certainly don't want to take away from the pain and the difficulties that people have had, the number of deaths which have been absolutely just soul destroying in lots of ways. At the same time, what I was reminded of is that within every crisis, there's an opportunity, according to Albert Einstein. So in that context, it struck me as a chance to think about what have we learned from these most unprecedented times? What are some of the things we value and maybe want to retain, and as we move out of lockdown and start to go back to whatever the new life is going to be, whatever the new normal is going to be for us, what are some of the things we want to retain? What have we learned, and what do we want to move forward on? And in that conversation, I know the sound wasn't very clear, but Richard was talking, for example, about how people are starting to use technology more to address their health and well-being, maybe using online forums or online places now rather than going to their GPs, directly face-to-face GPs, in order to kind of resolve some of their medical issues. So that sort of thing is starting to emerge from what I gather. Equally, it's something from my perspective, and I hope others would share the same thing. We're starting to think again about what's important to us as a society. Because in the past, I think we probably think about, certainly bankers, you know, the amount of wages and monies and stuff they were claiming was just phenomenal. And we didn't give as much attention and recognition to our key workers, to our health and social care workers. And now we're seeing some changes in that direction. So people are applauding the care workers on Thursday evenings here anyway, Rebecca. So we're starting to do some shift, it seems to me, in terms of what's important to us. And it's those sorts of things I'm hoping we can have a debate about today. What are the kind of key learnings we want to take away from our time, either in lockdown or from social distancing, or however we want to talk about it, that we think is valuable and we want to move forward on. So that's where I want to start. And I don't know whether, Rebecca, I can ask you to kick off the conversation and then see what... yeah, so sorry, I'm just reading things and trying to manage the conversation as usual.
Sure. So your question is, what have you valued in these circumstances that you want to retain?
Mm-hmm.
Having the kids here, they all have tablets and they're doing online school in the morning, and then they have tasks that they have to do when they're offline. So they just spend about an hour online.
Mm-hmm.
And because they're able to do it with a computer, they can see all their classmates. They can talk to each other and giggle, and you know, it's actually it serves its purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and they're still being educated. I think that we do need to. So I would like to keep that in some form.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe have smaller, as we're opening up and we're going back to school this next fall. Maybe we could do half of the class at home online and half of the class in school, so that there could be more distancing. I think that cleanliness is also another takeaway. People, I think, neglected, you know, washing their hands and I think they're going to come away learning that this is very important. Even our children are learning. And so I just think there's other ways. And again, I agree about the technology. You can do yoga, you know, on your TV screen, and you can do it with other people. And you can have groups of people talking, all different forums, and it could, you know, it helps people so they don't feel so alone, and they know that there's other people there that are standing with them for, you know, and talking to them and really being involved. So I think if we don't open up and go back out there and have guidelines to open it up, it won't be as successful. And I think we've learned that distancing has been very successful. And so we need to have guidelines, though, for that to happen, because I think a lot of people are afraid to send their kids to school and afraid to go out in public. So.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks. And I'm seeing Owen saying, Owen, do you want to to share that with me, with the rest of us, because you've sent it privately? I mean, if people want to share with everyone, can you make sure that in the chat you've got everyone clicked? So, Owen, can I ask you to sort of?
Yeah. So I just the only reason I sent it privately was so that you can help sanity check some of my thoughts. Relevancy. So yeah, I thought, given that I failed due to the kitten destroying the internet connection last week, I thought I'd make an effort this week. And you sent a text with the questions, as Rebecca already said. And you said the first question was, what have you valued in the present circumstances? Well, I think the main thing is time. So there was, and I broke that down into two things: time to think and time to act and do. Now, obviously, we're governed by the rules of our lockdown, and there are a lot of things that we can't do. But as long as we focus on the things that we can do, I've focused on having a real think about what it is I actually want to do, what I want to achieve, and also getting a lot of things done. Now, it might not necessarily be work related, because the volumes of work that I've been getting in have dropped off so much. But I can do things that are on the periphery of work related. So I can read the motivational and self-help books. I can start planning my career. I can consider, do I actually want to be doing what I'm doing right now, or do I need a complete change? And if it's the latter, then I can be focusing on getting qualifications virtually for doing the latter. If it's the former, then I can be looking at the self-help books, the Stephen Covey, the Chimp Paradox, the Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, all these things. I can start reading those and focusing in on those to try and improve what I'm doing. So that was what I've been looking at, and trying to compartmentalize, trying to break down what I need to do, and then build it back up in terms of structure while I'm doing my daily work. Because that is the thing I think we're all lacking, is in a lot of ways, is unless you're mad busy at work, working from home, then trying to find structure in all of this was a real struggle for me in the first week or two. So that has helped. And I'd say the last point I'll say before I shut up is the thing I've noticed is the lack of demands and requests from others. I just live with my partner, no one else. So other than the cat waking me up on a morning to get fed, I don't really have a lot of demands upon me. Now, previous to this, I used to think all the time, these demands, these are the things that are causing me to be stressed. It's all these people wanting a piece of me, wanting me to do this, wanting me to do that, not thinking about my time. And I found several weeks into the lockdown, I was still stressed. And I was like, hang on a minute, there's no requests coming from the outside. No one's asking me to do anything. Why am I stressed? And I realized it was me, my way of thinking. I'd suddenly become a hard taskmaster, and I was acting as a slave driver to myself. And obviously, I was putting myself up under a lot of pressure to get absolutely everything done on the wish list. So yeah, just a refocusing back on myself and realizing that I'm the cause of a large part of my own work-related stress. So yeah.
Thanks, Owen. So what I'm hearing from Rebecca, there was quite a bit around schools and how schools might need to adapt and change. The classroom sizes, there may be half of teaching and learning in classroom settings are half online and so on. Cleanliness, big thing that we've been, and the whole notion of using technology more, and from Owen then time to think, time to work out what's important to you, time to reflect. So what are other people's thoughts, please? So Francis or others, I know Francis has said something. So Francis, do you want to jump in here and share what's going on for you? What have you noticed that you value now? Hello, are you there?
Yeah.
Okay, so Francis isn't. So Eddie, do you want to share what are you learning and valuing now?
I think A couple of things. One is I'm having to be more sociable. I'm someone who likes time on their own, and we've actually got 2 family members living with us because their house has been renovated. So during lockdown, they moved in with us. And I'm also having a lot more contact with my older sisters. I've got 2 sisters, one in their 80s and one in their late 70s. So we're doing a WhatsApp video call every Sunday afternoon. And I'm really valuing that, and I'm learning to perhaps be more sociable myself with people and to adapt to people being in the household. And it was interesting what Owen was saying about not having all that stress of people contacting him and wanting to talk to him or get things done. Because one thing I noticed last week, I think, is that the attendances at hospital in A&E have gone down dramatically. In England, about 1/3 of people going to A&E have dropped. The number has dropped by 1/3 going to the emergency room or whatever you call it in America. And what I think is that's proving that people can cope a bit more on their own. They can be a bit more resilient and independent. And, you know, have we got a bit of a culture, certainly in the NHS, that encourages that dependency, where people with a broken toenail rush to hospital? So those were just some of my observations from what's been said so far.
Great, thanks, Eddie. So being more sociable and spending more time with family, and also reflecting on, as you say, how it's impacting the behaviours that others are having and how they're using services like the health service in hospitals and so on. Natasha, do you want to share some thoughts? And Francis, what's going on with your mic? Natasha.
Yeah, thank you. Hi. Interesting combination that we have here. I think on many levels probably would be wise to keep my mouth shut, and because I do see the world in a very, very different way. So to stick to the programme, what have I valued and what do I want to maintain? Well, actually, in many ways, it hasn't impacted my life in a huge way. On a practical level, on a spiritual level, yes, and a mindset level, yes, because I'm beginning to see the big picture, and I understand what's really at play here. So let's park that one and talk about the beautiful things that have come out of this. Number one, how incredible my children have been in terms of their creativity. I mean, my daughter absolutely adores, she misses her friends, and you know, and I don't subscribe to this self distancing or whatever you want to call it. I just do not subscribe to it, because I've listened to so many virologists and scientists and doctors to know that that's not really the main issue. But apart from the lack of physical contact, which obviously does concern me, and really, you know, we're designed to connect with human beings. We're designed for human touch and hugging. I miss hugging. I never remember my dreams, but the 2 nights ago, I actually woke up remembering that I'd hugged 3 people, and I don't know who they were. They were just young people, and they were there in front of me, and I said, it's okay, you're not in danger. You know, I'll give you a hug. And I remember feeling that, and there was a reason why, you know, because obviously that was lacking. So my daughter particularly, she's amazing. You know, she's 14. She's been doing her online homework. She's interspersing that with doing FaceTime with her friends. Like Rebecca was saying, you know, connecting with her friends and things. It's just such a beautiful thing. She bakes cakes because she's an amazing baker. She cooks food. She does some painting. She does singing. She does playing the piano. Then she walks the dog every day. She's having more exercise than before, and she's super, super organized. And actually, I think it's what it's shown me. And my son does things in a very different way. He's a boy. and he's a little bit older, but also he's going for big long walks as well, and connecting with his friends online. He's actually under the GCSE year, so he doesn't really have any work to do, which is challenging because, you know, we want him to prepare for A levels, and yet he's not able to get the curriculum because they're not supposed to prepare for it, which is crazy. So what it's shown me is massive problems with education, and how creative our children are when we take them out of the constraints of that. So that what I love about my children. And then for me, I love being out in nature. I mean, we need to connect with nature. It's one of the best, incredible, what do they call it? Well, it's how we heal our mental health and well-being, for sure. And it's certainly one of the things that I always recommend to clients and the people that I teach who work with people in mental health, that, you know, you have to connect with nature, you have to get outside, you have to earth and ground yourself. So going for a walk every day, I found 2 amazing sunset spots that I now totally indulge myself in. One is sitting amongst the sheep and the little lambs in a field, and they literally come up to me, they sniff my legs, they come and sit next to me, they sniff my feet, because they're not afraid. Because, you know, we're meant to, what is highlighted in a lot of ways is the fact that being in an office in a suit is very clunky, it's very unnatural, it's very unhealthy. Sitting down for long periods of time isn't good, and we've got to get out, whether you cycle, whether you run, whether you walk, whether you hug a tree, whether you stand with bare feet on the ground, whatever it is. But we've lost this, and I think really one of the things that I would like to introduce is to take people. I mean, I do Facebook Lives every night. I'm doing a video diary. It's day 40 today. And I said to everybody, beautiful people that come on, and we do meditations, and I say, listen, you guys, you've all got to come and join me. Bring your own picnics when this circus is over, and we will go to this sunset spot, and we will just sit and enjoy the sunset, the trees, the fields, the views, and this beautiful world that we live in. Because most people are like this with their phones. And I just want to say, you know, people are saying to me, I heard the birds. And I'm like, duh. You know, they're there every day. Hello, guys. So, yeah, I'm all about the love and connecting with nature, connecting with one another.
Brilliant. Thank you. So one of the things that I found interesting there, Natasha, because you talked about, if you like, a lack of structure or not being so hemmed in by formal structures like education. And Owen earlier talked about having a structure to some extent. So I think that's quite an interesting balance. What, you know, where does that come from? How do we kind of get the balance right, if you like? Let me bring Martin in and just to reflect where you're coming from on this, Martin.
Hang on. Oh, I am unmuted. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yay.
Great. Yeah, no, I was just following on I completely agree with, you know, it sounds like a contradiction, but I agree with both what Owen was saying, what Francis had typed, and what Natasha just said there. And I guess that speaks to something of a paradox, I think, of our times, that, you know, and I think we said it last week, that, you know, everyone's feeling so much more grounded socially with other people. And we're, you know, and I totally agree. I'm spending time just walking around in nature, just enjoying being, you know, for me, it's like a common because I'm middle of London, but, you know, still just being around some greenery and having that, and access to that. At the same time, I'm enjoying things like this, which is completely technologically dependent and, you know, absolutely represents the pinnacle of human civilization and innovation. So there's a bit of a contradiction going on here, you know, a paradox to the benefits that we're getting out of this sort of enforced lockdown and this shutdown of our economies. And I wonder how that gets resolved, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's you know, we're going to live in this sort of weird space that sort of is a mismatch of both. But I wouldn't have a problem with that. I think that'd be a happy medium. But, you know, I don't know. I think there are real world consequences to, you know, I mean, I'm not sure how much we'll shift things or we'll add an online element to our lives in terms of just this kind of social interaction. But if we do, I mean, that's going to have real world consequences. That'll mean, you know, fewer businesses, you know what I'm saying, that specialize in, you know, getting people together, socializing. I'm thinking, pubs or even gyms, things like that. Suddenly, they're less viable, because we're finding alternatives through tech to do that. So, I don't know. I'm happy with everything everyone's saying. I think that there's an interesting tension that comes out of all of that.
Indeed. So kind of going back to you then, Rebecca, reflections on what you're hearing thus far, because it strikes me that, as we're saying, there's some very positive things coming out of the enforced lockdown. And it's also saying to me there are choices perhaps we're going to have to make, but who makes those choices? Do we have a say in the way forward, what happens next? How much of the balancing, Owen is calling it balancing between chaos and order, but how much of the balancing that needs to happen? For example, I was thinking yesterday when I was talking to Richard about, I know there's been a kind of continuous drive, if you like, over the years towards city centres and town centres becoming less and less, because as we move our lives online. So one of the questions for me then became, well, what is going to be the role and function of our centres? And in that context, it seems to me that, as Martin and others are saying, technology potentially changes our behaviours, changes our way of lives, and certainly some of the physical places we engage with and interact with. Similarly, I think Natasha and Rebecca, you talked about different ways of engaging with nature. Rebecca, you talked about maybe online yoga and things. So I do think there's a little bit of a tension that's going to go on in the future as to how do we reconcile socially connected with being virtual and technologically minded in the future. So thoughts on that, please?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hi.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, finally.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm sorry, I was speaking before, but I don't think there was something wrong. You weren't hearing me, I was hearing you.
Okay. The video's frozen, but we can hear you.
Oh, good. Okay. Yes, I think that going back really to mental health, my experience of the lockdown for mental health has not been positive at all. Not for me personally, but for people that can't go out, like my son. He's not supposed to go out, but he does go out. He's supposed to be inside for 12 weeks. He's already in a bad way. So he's going out, but he's not going to supermarkets. It's difficult for him to kind of relate to other people because he just doesn't see why he should be in, even though he understands, obviously about the pandemic, but he's finding it really difficult to cope with, to be honest. My parents as well, I think that I worry that when this is all over, that they'll kind of go off their feet a bit more. Whereas before they were walking about, and my dad used to go out a lot. And I think it's really getting to them now that they're just stuck in all the time, and they can sit in the garden. So it's difficult. And I kind of do what I can. Obviously, I do all their shopping and my son's shopping, but it's not easy. They don't have the kind of outlook that I've got, where I'll do exercises at home instead of going swimming. So I don't think the resources are out there for people like this, actually. And they weren't there before, so they're certainly not going to be there now. So that's just my experience, sort of trying to sort of help other people.
Yeah. So again, the message here seems to be, it depends on where we're coming from. Some people have been able to balance it better than others. Some people have been able to adapt to it much more easily than others. And I don't think that's necessarily an age thing, is it, Francis? Because your son is, 20? Your parents are in their late 80s, I think.
Yeah. And my daughter, funny enough, she's got a completely different attitude. She's just going about her business in spite of it. She's a student. She's doing work online. She's nearly finished. She's going to work part-time because what she does is like a key worker role in supported housing. So she's just carrying on in spite of it. But then her mental health isn't the same as my son's. So every one of you does have a different perspective on it, depending on their psyche in any case. So people are going to find it really difficult. Some people will.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer is to that, but I'm just sharing it really.
So I guess the question then becomes, others, is this as much about mindset as behaviors? Do our, as we go forward, and if there are things we've valued, being more in nature, the connection and so on, is there something about how people are supported and to adapt different mindsets or to be able to deal with this and operate in different ways? Sorry, I'm being a little bit garbled here, but you know what I'm getting at? Because what I'm hearing is, it sounds like depending on how you view the world potentially, you're going to have a different way of engaging with what your experience has been so far and what happens next for you. So again, thoughts on that, please? If that makes sense.
I think it makes sense because it all happened to everyone at the same time, as if everyone was the same, but of course they're not. And that's just something that happened really. And it's like having to deal with it.
Okay. Rebecca, Martin, Natasha, do you have some thoughts you want to share on that kind of mindset piece and how
definitely. Oh yeah, it's all about the mindset. It's interesting because I've made some notes. I'm just going to hop in. Sorry. I'm not going to be polite. I love you all, but I'm not going to be polite to get it out there.
Go for it.
Yeah, I made 11 points here. I'm just going to run through them, some of which obviously are shared, listening to the things that Owen said and Eddie and actually Rebecca, for sure. So definitely moving forward. So online schooling, or partially that, I love it. Gives the children more creativity, less constraints, because I think that a lot of the constraints in school are wrong. They're judged by, results, and if you are not a straight A student, and I never was, then you come out feeling a failure, and I definitely am not, and none of us are. So my concerns around that. Importance of time to think and really getting, reevaluating your life, what's important, what counts, what matters. And so this has been a beautiful gift for many. I mean, I do set aside time, and I am organized, by the way. I just don't like having constraints put on me, because that quashes my creativity. So definitely having time to really think about what's important in life, because this has been a great leveler, and it doesn't matter how many cars you have in your drive, how many Armani suits you've got, how much money you've got in the bank. Right now, we are all the same. And I love that, because that's been my belief always, that every man, woman and child, no matter where they are, we are equal. We are all beautiful, beautiful human beings. Self-education, I think, is really important, and that's not in the education system. This is an ongoing. Self-awareness, reflection, very important. Quality time with others, absolutely crucial, and that's been brought up. And spending time each day in nature, empowering ourselves not only on the education side, but also moving back to natural remedies, because you've only got to look a little bit on Facebook, shares on YouTube, to see that the big pharmaceuticals do not have the answer. And there are many problems, and I won't go into that right now, but there are many problems with that. So going back to nature. And the reason I mention that is because for the last 14 years, I have not had any pharmaceutical intervention at all, not even a paracetamol, not even an aspirin, and I'm super healthy. So, and also more connection with our spiritual side, because it's been vastly neglected, quashed, squashed, ignored, denied. So, I think it was Owen who mentioned the yin and the yang on the chat, and I think that's so important. It was all about compromise and all about contrast, day, night, light, day, good, bad. We are all both sides, and we don't want to go into our do the shadow work, as I call it. I mean, I'm Mrs. Positive Pants, so going in to do the shadow work is challenging for me too, but it's really important that we do go there. It's interesting to hear what Francis says, and I don't know what the situation is with your son, but I totally relate to that, because I have two brothers with very severe mental illnesses, and not being able to visit my brother in a care home has been hugely painful for him and also the rest of the family. And then, and there's just 2 left and then I'll be quiet. So thank you for your patience. Reminding all of us that we rush around, we're 100 miles an hour, and therefore we really value pausing and breathing, because we're human beings, not human doings. But we have been, again, I'll use this word, controlled, contained, and brought up and conditioned, if you like, all the C words, to be, you've got to do better, bigger, better, more. I can't be successful until this. I can't be happy until this. No, you have to say enough. Because I ran a company for 19 years. I had staff. I was 100 mile an hour girl. I was stressed. I worried. I was unhappy. And everything came crashing down 14 years ago. I've totally changed my life, and I'm much happier than I've ever been. And this is the work I do with clients. So it's vitally important that we really appreciate, smelling the flowers and the roses. And then the final point I would just like to make is, going back to certainly what Lorna was saying, and probably a few others were thinking, perspective is everything. I did a video live on this the other day. It was quite interesting. It was a little bit out there, because most of the things I say are, but I'm just, I don't have it's not that I don't have a filter. It's just that I'm not worried about speaking my truth. And Wayne Dyer said this, and also it goes back to Buddha, which I think is so beautiful. And with regards to perspective, what you focus on expands. And, we see people over here on this side of the spectrum. They're in fear, they're worried, they're overwhelmed, they're stressed. And we see people over here, so because that's their perspective, and because it's their perspective that becomes their reality. And you see people over here who operate from a heart-centered position, heart-centered point, who are operating and vibrating at the frequency of love, joy, peace, abundance, compassion, kindness. And their reality is completely different. And yet we are experiencing the same thing all over the world. So, I love the fact that, we touched on mindfulness and mindset, and perspective. Thank you.
It's a really great summing up of all the kind of key messages that have been coming out. And what it's then kind of making me think about is, if we're valuing all of these things we've been talking about, the mindset piece, the time in nature, and so on, at some point we're going to be, as I said, kind of coming out of the enforced lockdown, however that's going to be done. And the question, and I know Eddie put it in the chat, is there a risk that we're just going to go back to living 100 miles an hour again? So, Natasha, I'm going to come back to you, but for now, I want to hear from Rebecca and others. How are we going to guard against that kind of, what used to happen then, going to be the norm in the future? How are we going to make sure that we do smell the flowers and so on?
I kind of, if you're going to have a takeaway of positivity from this, and I know I'm going to try and say this correctly, I think that the governments, and I am not saying to control people, but to control our environment and the whole world right now is in a real flux. So we have to be able to open things up, because you can keep people safe, but honestly, without our economy, a lot of these people they are without homes, without food, without money, they have children. So, you have to look at it, we need balance, I guess. Everything has to be balanced. And with this coronavirus, our leaders now have a responsibility to say, okay, let's open it up. However, we need these guidelines, because if they don't, and employers are just left to come up with their own guidelines, then it's going to be all about money and not about the people. People need to come to work because companies are about revenue. So I'm just saying that somehow there has to be balance. And with this coronavirus, if the leaders come in and put the correct guidelines in place that employers have to follow for their employees, for their people, then I think we could actually come out of this ahead. We could be more balanced. Instead of butt in seat at work, maybe there could be you work from home and you go to work, or less hours in seats, or there's got to be less staffing involved. And when we go back to work, things are going to have to go slow, and there's going to have to be some real thought involved, but it has to happen. But I think it could be more balanced if we had structure and guidance from a higher level, not the corporate level. The corporate should be led.
Yeah, sorry, Martin, your thoughts. What are your thoughts on this? So where is the kind of direction or the drive going to come from, and what's our role in it? Because we've been talking today and we've shared quite a bit. So what's our role and responsibility in helping to make this happen and to shaping the future?
What's our role? That's interesting, and I'll try and come to that eventually as I talk and figure out what I think while I talk. So forgive me if this rambles. But just following on from Rebecca, Natasha, and something Eddie had written as well, is I think there's a suggestion of sort of coming out of this. It means, if I can put it in crude economic terms, less productivity, or less focus on productivity, and less like saying, right, we must maximize how we can we make human society this sort of resource efficient, or not even resource efficient, but producing efficient entity. But what we are optimized for is for making things or doing stuff, and how do we shift that? But I think the dramatic consequences of that kind of shift can't be underestimated. It's, it's touching on something that Eddie said. It's kind of like, okay, we have the NHS and it's there, but it doesn't mean you go to it for every little thing that you have, because we don't have the resources for that, because we're going to move away from something like that. It means still developing your self-sufficiency and, solving problems yourself. It means, the consequences are huge, potentially huge for that, And I think that's quite interesting, because, again, it solves a lot of problems in terms of, we don't want our society, we don't want to be sort of like just capitalism made flesh, to say we want to be a bit more than that. But that does mean, I think Rebecca mentioned this, this means less people working, and then, what does that mean? Okay, we're going to have fewer people employed. So what does that mean for capital? Capitalism is just a system where, people have money, and that gives them access to choices, and that's it, really. That's all it is. So what kind of capitalism can you develop in a world where not as everyone is working? I think, I said it last week, I will say it again. I think ideas like universal basic income, taxing them, really productive parts of society, if that's automated businesses or whatever else, you tax them, and then you give as a dividend, even if it's a minimum amount of money to people who aren't working, for them to do other things, to find their own creativity, to find their own path. Because one element that I do disagree with Natasha is, I'm not sure how universal sometimes some of these solutions are. I love nature. I think there's a lot of us who sort of will agree with, the fact that we need to reconnect. But for some people, I don't think it's necessary. Some people, it's not going to do. It's not going to be fulfilling. I think mindfulness is really, 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 really important. I think it's incredibly beneficial. But there's lots of studies to show that it's really harmful to some people. That they cannot be lost in their thoughts. It's just not good for them, and they need distraction. It's true. It's really true.
It's very true.
I was really shocked by this. I remember thinking like, oh, mindfulness is great. And, I'm having my slightly Buddhistic phase, and then reading about these studies about how it can lead to depersonalization syndromes in people, where they no longer feel that, they can't sort of like reintroduce themselves, reintegrate with themselves. They can't figure it out. So it's like, wow, it can actually lead to personality disorders. You know what I mean? So some people just shouldn't do it. You know what I mean? So what's
like
to say
Trump.
to them? Like Trump. No, he leads a healthy dose of depersonalization. A healthy dose. But
very much.
Sorry?
Finish off what you're saying.
Oh, apologies. But so it's just sort of, I guess it's about having a political economy that, a politics and an economy, I should say, where it gives us room to self-actualize to some degree without the threat of, destitution if something goes wrong. You know what I'm saying? You want to have sort of certain protections, certain minimum standards, but there's maybe a little more innovation on our own part to go our own way and to find our own path. And I do think tech's really important for that.
Yeah, and I'm picking up in the chat are talking. Gavin and Angela and Owen are talking about getting the balance right again. And there's something which caught my eye with what Owen said about optimizing ourselves, which resonates with your self-actualization. And I think we're hearing in this conversation today quite a lot of emphasis on finding that right balance of being able to be in touch with nature, despite some of the challenges, Martin, that might come with that. Smelling the flowers, recognizing different mindsets and perspectives. But my big issue still remains: what happens when we open the front door and start to re-engage in the world? And who makes the decision as to what happens in this new world of ours, whatever that new world is? Because my sense of it is, do we still leave it to politicians and our higher ups, not corporates, as Rebecca says, to shape our next phase of human evolution? Or is this our chance to have, and I know it's probably crazy to talk about it, but a democratization, a different way of engaging with our world? And Owen's got his hand up, so okay, so Owen, I'm going to ask you, and I see Martin will want and Eddie will want to say something, so Owen, come in there.
Well, I just want to say, we're talking about politics and government, and I just sort of think that this is something that's already in our power to change. Ultimately, people are going on about politics and government, or do we need to change society? Do we need to, almost as if we need to have a revolution or something like that? And ultimately, we get to vote every time we go down the supermarket. People who care about the environment, or if you care about animal welfare, you make a vote when you take the products off the shelves. And you take it, you pay for it. You influence the way, in a macroeconomic sense, how goods and services are delivered, how those companies treat their staff, how they treat any animals that are there then produced into meat, how they treat the land when they grow vegetables in a certain way. Say you pick organic over non-organic, and I think it's similar when we're talking about work-life balance and hours. Ultimately, it is incumbent upon you as the individual, if you are in a job where you aren't being allowed to be, well, should we say, for want of a better way of putting it, healthy, it is incumbent upon you to recognize that and to work in order to deliver your own happiness. You can't delegate the responsibility for developing yourself or obtaining your own happiness to someone else, because invariably they'll get it wrong. So it's down to our own internal compass and our own internal values to assess what it is that will make us happy, what it is that will bring order to the chaos and balance our existences, and to what extent or degree we require mindfulness in our life, so on and so forth. So yeah, I don't think necessarily we need to think too much about how we need to reorder society, rather how we need to reorder ourselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So a kind of controversial ideas there, I think, personally, Owen, if I may say so, because it's saying the responsibility, and I hear what you're saying in lots of ways and agree with in some respects, that the individual has to have ownership and responsibility. But we live, and I think Martin's just put it up, we live in a society. And we can't ignore the impact of that on us as individual beings. And so my question still remains, what's the balance here that needs to be struck? What's the balance between we live in representative democracies for the most part? Do we now say, because the world has shifted, it's been a leveler and all the rest of it that people have talked about, and we as individuals have discovered opportunities to be different, to operate in the world in a different way, to show up in very different ways with ourselves and with others in relationship to our ecosystem, for example. So I think last week I spoke about the negative impact that some of our behaviors have had on the ecosystem. So here's a chance for us to re-evaluate and to represent ourselves in relationship with each other and in relationship with nature and in the environment. But who's going to be, if you like, accountable for that? How is that going to be accounted for? And that's something I'm still kind of puzzled about and I'm conscious of time, but I'm really curious to hear. And Martin, I think, Rebecca and then Martin. Yes.
Okay, I'll do it really fast. Here, the governors were in charge of opening cities, and we discussed Vegas. And there was a lot of controversy because the governor was like, we need to open up Vegas. And they said, well, how do we do this? How will we be safe? And she said, I don't know. I don't own a casino. And it's just like, okay, well, right there, if there was just a few guidelines, I'm not saying to dictate, but just to have a few guidelines in there saying, okay, it needs to be safe for your employees. You need to have a lot of hand sanitizer. You need to take temperatures. You need to work less shifts. You're only allowed to have so many people, in the building. I just don't know how you could open up Vegas. I'm sorry. It's just absolutely insane. But I just think it just for some guidelines, and then to have the employer involved, because if you say open up a city and the employee says, I'm scared, I don't want to come to work, and then they're fired. I mean, there's got to be some kind of a balance between each level, because we are tiered, and I don't know, I just wanted to throw that out there. It's very controversial.
It is. There are some very controversial things there. Then I'm going to pick up on Eddie and the others. Martin.
Me? Oh, yes. No, that really, really interesting stuff coming from Rebecca and obviously Owen as well. I think you said something really interesting. Because I think that's touching on what Eddie had said early on as well. There's a realm, there is a sphere of activity that we can play a tremendous amount of influence on our immediate environment and even on the wider sort of society in terms of the choices that we make, and that's real, and that's something that we can do. So I think as part of this prescription, that certainly for us to start sort of committing to how we want to interact with the world is a choice that we make. But going the other way, there are real blocks, out there in the world. I mean, living in the societies is living in a state of mutual dependence to varying degrees, particularly living in a capitalist society. The whole point is to be mutually dependent. It's, I can sew a dress, but I can't kill a cow. So I sell my dress sewing skills so the cow killer can give me some beef. That is what capitalism's about. And so there isn't a kind of a godlike independence of the individual. We are not little islands of pure free choice. So we are going to have to, again, as Rebecca said, we're tiered. We are these individuals that, have individual accountability to make these individual choices. And then we have sort of our community, our regional sort of relations that we can affect. And then we have the national. And it just so happens the national is the most powerful. That's the reality. It's like, we are all in lockdown because our elected government said, this is what's got to happen. And we did it, I'm kind of amazed that we did it, but we did it, because there is a measurable authority there that we have to respect. And to go against that takes such an act of radicalism that it's, you know what I'm saying? It's hard to conceive. So we've got to I'm just copying what Rebecca said, but we've got to think in that tiered way. It's definitely individual. It's definitely, you've got to go out there and, you've got to deal with the political aspects of this as well. You know what I mean?
Thank you, Eddie, and then I'm going to take Natasha and Francis.
A bit like Martin said earlier, it's just sort of thoughts in my head that will come out in some way. I think we've got to the stage in the discussion where we're saying individuals have responsibility for their own well-being, and what we're going to do about that. And people rightly pose that question, and I accept that we all need to have our own individual responsibility for changing things if we want to change things from this experience. But equally, there are some things we can't change. We can react to shop workers, the NHS workers, and everybody else in terms of saying what fantastic people they are now. But when this is over, will they still be, will that value go down? And will shop workers, refuse collectors, cleaners still stay at the bottom of our societal pile? Immigration still be the issue that it is? So how can we, if we want to influence and change that, somehow we have to see how we can change the views of other people in our communities, as well as the leaders and employers.
Yeah.
And I've got no, easy answer to that. But I feel strongly we've got to try and do both, and accept our own responsibility for both, the individual and how do we change things wider than just us.
Yeah. Thank you, Natasha, and then Francis. Coming in field with you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So I made some notes, and this may not be to actually say, not necessarily the answering of the specific question, but just these points that I would love to share. The first is going back to something that Martin was saying, that not everybody can handle freedom. And I would challenge that, because I don't disagree with the comment at all, and I've seen it as well. I've seen the madness of it all, as we all have. And I think it goes down to self-discipline, and we're very good at dealing with what we can see, but we're not very good at dealing with what we can't see. And what I'm talking about here is our mental muscles. We understand that if you want a six-pack, you need to go to the gym, and you can't just go once. Well, your mental muscle and your mental discipline is exactly the same. And I think that this is certainly one of the things that I first of all practice. And one of the things I practice are five Tibetan rites. They're over 2,500 years old, and they're amazing. It takes literally a couple of minutes every day, and you incrementally increase that. That's a very good discipline. It's sort of mindfulness, yoga, kind of mixed into one, but very simple to do. So things like meditation, yoga, mindfulness, prayer, anything like this are really good mental disciplines. And the mind is like an errant child. And somebody meant, I don't know if Owen or Eddie earlier, about the chimp paradox. Absolutely. I chuckled when you mentioned that, because, these are really important teachings. And to understand about philosophy, something I've studied for the last 3.5 years and continue to do so, because, these practices are really important. But people have lost their anchors. They've forgotten who they are, and I think that's the bottom line. They've forgotten who they are, and therefore they've hung on to the fact that they are married to this person, or they've got this house, or they've got this job title, they've got these letters after their name, and actually that's what they're using as their anchors, and they're forgetting who they really are. And when we go back to, and I've written back to basics, back to nature, back to simplifying everything, we need to start, doing the inner work. not saying, oh, or giving our power away and saying this is what society says, this is what environment says, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the first point that I just wanted to put out there, really. And nobody's right or wrong or anything. It's simply kind of looking with different eyes. And I would love a democracy, because actually I'm very concerned at the decisions the governments are making. I'm like Martin, I am shocked that we have all been a whole bunch of sheep and go, yeah, we'll hide in our homes. Well, I tell you, for one, I'm not hiding in my home for anybody. And they can shoot me on the street if they want to, but I am not hiding in my home because I don't believe a lot of this stuff. But and it does concern me that we are moving more to this elite controlled environment. This is what's rolling out, and if you are interested and if you dig deep and do your research, you'll come to the same conclusions. So how can we do something about it, and what can we do? Self-reliance, 100%. Learn to rely on ourselves, grow your own vegetables. I know Rebecca said she enjoys planting stuff. We've got loads of vegetable beds, and our and picking the lettuce, the radishes every day, and it's wonderful. Taking responsibility for ourselves, and really, the fact that the hospitals are empty, and they are empty. There are less people going, again, it's taking responsibility, isn't it? Oh, I've got a cough, a cold, I go to the doctor, can you give me a pill? No, take responsibility for yourself. If you've got a sore throat, pick some sage, brew yourself a cuppa and pour some honey in, and that's a natural antiseptic and soother. It works. And remembering that we are creative beings, and we can be much more self-sufficient, and create our own communities, and really help each other, respect each other, be mindful about each other, show compassion and kindness to each other. Checking on your neighbours, are they okay? Is there anything that you need that I've got, and we can exchange and swap, and almost going back to the way our grandparents lived. And so I would love to see a very different way of being, which does move a little bit away from technology, but uses the best of it, but moves away from the worst of it. More connection with human beings, and more taking time to really listen to one another, moving away from competition to collaboration. So I think, even though that doesn't fully answer the question that you posed, Lorna, it sort of explains a little bit about how I see moving forward in a really positive way collectively, because I do believe, we're all in it together, and we have to find a way. For instance, you don't see the bees one day, and bees, by the way, are our greatest ally, because without the bees we'll have no fruit, no vegetables, no salads, no nothing. So we'll be living on the most basic of food, which will be so bad for our health. But bees, and ants actually, but you don't see the bees one day. The beehive, one bee packs his bags and goes, do you know what, I've had enough of you guys, I'm off doing it on my own. Because they understand that they're part of a collective, and we are part of a collective. We're all part of the human race, and we're all part of this consciousness that we have denied for so long, and it's starting to rise up. People are starting to wake up and ask questions and saying what's really going on, and what's important, and how differently can we be, and how can we connect more with each other. And for some, yes, of course it's challenging, but it's actually really beautiful when somebody takes the time to really listen to another human being. It's the most beautiful thing. Without, when you listen to somebody and you really hear what they're saying, and you're not quick to try and come back with something or quick whip responses, but you actually truly really listen to what they're saying, it's the most beautiful gift that you can give to another human being, and they feel important, and they feel worthy, and they feel heard. So these are the things that I think are really important for us human beings long term.
So a really powerful message there about listening, and it kind of reminded me what you said earlier. We are human beings, not human beings. So really important message there, Francis. And I'm conscious of time, guys, so I'm going to kind of start to bring things to a close. But Martin, I noticed, did you want to say something? I'll come back to you. But Francis, let me just bring Francis in first.
I think I agree with most of what people have said, not all of it. Unfortunately, not everyone is as positive, and you know, you put a pair of glasses on and they see the world completely differently, unfortunately. And for them, the experience is different. They don't have the positivity of mind through no fault of their own. So I think they have found it harder. But those who can, I suppose, have to rally around and try and be positive for them. And I hope that we all come out of this feeling a bit more positive and a bit more aware of how other people are feeling. And yes, I do agree with listening to people, really listening to people. Perhaps we don't always do that. But I just don't think everyone sees the world in that way and everyone is so positive. And I think people just have to understand that, really.
Yeah, great, thank you. Martin, did you want to come in before we start to bring it to a close?
Yeah, sure. So I do have another call to go into, but no, I want to say, first of all, again, really, really enjoyed this. It's you get you thinking, and you go, all right, I got to think about what I think about these things. I wanted to touch on some things that Natasha said, is that we're sort of we're without an anchor, and we're replacing the things around us. I think that's very, very, very true. I think that's one of the things I think that we do have to do. And the only slight difference I'd have with Natasha is I don't think there is a one size fits all. I think that's one of the things that people are kicking at. I think, you know, my own personal experiences, I've been through staunch materialism, through, you know, born again nutter Christian to Buddhist, and now I'm kind of, you know, just cool with knowing I don't know. You know what I mean? Really.
Love that, Martin. Love that.
You know what I mean?
Love
just,
it.
I don't know. You know what I mean? And but that's been my journey. Now, that's not for everybody. For some people, they love, you know, there's a beauty in traditional religious structures, and that gives you something, and you need that. You need that space. But the other thing that I think that's necessary is for society to not just tolerate, but to allow, to encourage a space where someone can pursue something different. You know, something that may go against the grain to some degree. And I think that's the thing. It's about the pluralism. And that's anything, but I think with everything else, I was like, yeah, man. I think that's so true that we are kind of anchorless, and we need to go get, you know, find our anchors. And, you know, that's really important.
Really,
that's it.
Nice and done. Rebecca, do you want to just kind of pull things together and say any last words before we conclude for today?
I agree with everyone on several topics. I think that finding your anchor, we've been driven to work faster, better, more efficiently, and finding your anchor could be anything. It might not be outside in nature, it might not be spiritual, it might be because you like to do artwork or clay, or some people don't ever leave their house, and some people never want to be in their house. So we're all different. And like Natasha was saying, she knows how to help herself, and Owen was saying, you know, he's learned how to start structuring himself. And Francis was talking about different personalities, and some people are positive, some people are negative, and I totally agree. And they'll be less negative once they find what they're good at, whether it's music or baking, but I think they'll be more positive once they find whatever it is they need to be looking for. I love this call. I loved it last week. I loved it this week. I love hearing everyone's perspectives, because even if I don't agree, I get to chew on it for a week until next Tuesday and think about it and see how that is working with the people around me and how different they are and how I can help support them even in their differences.
Fantastic.
And thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I mean, for me, does anyone want to have any last minute say before I wrap up? Because I'm conscious of time. Said we'd just do an hour, but
just a massive thank you, Lorna. Just a massive thank you to you for bringing everyone together, and thank you for everyone's perspectives. I love everyone speaking in their truth. I love it. You know, I think it's beautiful when you speak from the heart and you share different ideas, and We all have open minds and open hearts. I just love it. It's beautiful. You can't make a cake with one ingredient.
That is brilliant. So I think that where I started from today was really kind of thinking about this question of what have we learned, what do we value, and it's been a really powerful conversation. It strikes me a lot of things have come up. You know, the Rebecca's notion of we're a kind of tiered system or a tiered societies, but it starts with the individual, and you know, different views as to individual roles and responsibilities here. But I'm left with Owen's God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Change the things I
amen.
The wisdom to know the difference. So I love that. And I loved Martin's, you know, I'm being comfortable with not knowing, because there are no easy answers here. But what I'm hopeful of is that through these connections and conversations, through time to do our own reflections and thinking, that when the door opens again, when we emerge through our front doors, that something will be different in us. And I think that's the message I heard. You know,
You'll be dancing down the streets.
It will be different in us, and we will engage with the world in a different way. And in the process of doing so, because I always believe we cannot not impact other people in the way we show up. So in terms of how we go about, you know, what happens next in our lives and for others, the connections we make will bring some of these thoughts, these ideas, these ways of being in our relationships with others. So a huge thank you to everybody. Special thanks to Rebecca for taking the time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca.
So early.
Thank you.
Cheers, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Thank you. Big hug.
Group hug.
Yes,
Cheers,
definitely.
Natasha.
Group hug.
Oh, yeah. Always.
Angela and everyone, and Owen and everyone. So thank you, guys. And we meet every week at 3:00. So, you know, it's an open forum. Anyone is free to come and join, and you've seen how it works. So come and share and discuss and debate, and let's see how we get on. Okay. So have
Cheers, Lorna. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.